Hi everyone, I'm Gohar Vardanyan and welcome back to a new video. Today we have another piece by a Venezuelan composer. This time it's Rodrigo Riera and the piece is called Preludio Criollo. As always, for the full performance of the piece, you can click in the info box or in the description box and we will continue with the lesson. So usually when I pick repertoire for these instructional videos, I kind of go for the beginner and intermediate level, maybe advanced intermediate, because I want the pieces and the lessons to be helpful to a lot more people, so they're accessible to more people. However, this time we have definitely ventured into the advanced level. This prelude is not easy, and if you just watch the video, you won't really be able to tell that maybe right away, because there isn't anything that just jumps out to signal like, oh yeah, this is technically a difficult piece. It looks very calm, it's not that fast, but what makes it really difficult is actually the chord shapes and the chord switches, and the fact that you literally have like no break. As soon as you start playing for the entire piece, it's just like perpetual, you keep going, and the chord shapes, them being already uncomfortable and having to switch from one to another, is going to really make your left hand pretty tired if you're not already an advanced player who can handle it. The reason the chord shapes and the chord changes are more difficult in this piece is because of the key that it's in. This prelude is in G minor, which means we have a B flat and an E flat. And flatted keys in general they're just notoriously more difficult to play on the guitar. This is because when you have a B flat, let's say you're playing in D minor, it's not that bad because it's only your B string that's taken away from you, so every single B that you come across in the piece, unless they're accidentals, is going to be flatted, so you have to play a B flat instead of an easy open B string. In this case we have two flats, and the second flat is E flat, and that's a string that we have two of, so all of a sudden 3 out of our 6 strings can no longer be played open. That makes left hand fingerings more complicated. You have to use more fingers to get the notes in the chord rather than just using open strings. That already makes it more complicated. And the shapes themselves, like if we're very used to playing a C major chord because the E is natural, all of a sudden you have to play a C minor, and now this shape is of course less comfortable than this one because of the finger arrangement. So the key itself contributes to the difficulty of the shapes, and then the pattern of the piece, it kind of requires you, even if you play it slower, it requires you to shift very quickly from one kind of complicated chord shape to another. And having the fact that this just goes from the beginning to the end without any breathing room, like there's no change in the texture, you're just playing the same thing, and you just have to change with the left hand, that makes it extremely tiring for the left hand. So what I meant about the chord shifts, I'll jump right into the middle of the piece because it is just, it has a perfect example for it. Oftentimes, because of the pattern in the right hand, which is this, the last note you play in the right hand sometimes falls, and not just sometimes, often enough, it falls under a finger that also has to play the first note of the next measure. So for example here, I have to play the C natural with the third finger and then use that same third finger to go to the A to play the first 2 notes of the next measure. So now, no matter how slow I'm playing, if I want to make sure that my C is not cheated, it's not cut off, and I'm not like swallowing it, I need to make sure I move fast. So that multiplied to a bazillion times that you have to do that makes the left hand work very quickly, so it's like bursts of movement that you have to do quickly in the left hand, making it physically more demanding. Another thing you want to consider is how fast you're going to play this piece and how quickly now you have to change from one awkwardly shaped chord to another. Now when I Google or YouTube this, the videos and the recordings that that came up for me were mostly played a lot slower than the tempo that I chose to play this at. And the reason I played it a lot faster is because when I look at the music, it says allegro at the top, and that kind of signals to me the feeling that the piece is going to have. When I see allegro, I'm expecting a piece that's going to sound fast, right? And you can interpret this allegro 2 ways. Like if you wanted to go kind of like the very mathematical route, allegro on a metronome starts at 120. The piece is written, and that's usually the actual like your tempo marking, right? Like if it's like 3/4 time, then your quarter note is at 120 and you have 3 quarter notes in a measure. Now this piece is written in 3/4, 6/8 time. So you have 2 time signatures for the piece because you have the accompaniment, the bass, or rather not the accompaniment, but just the bass line in 3/4. So it's 1 and 2 and 3 have the melody notes, this top line, in 6/8 time. You have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When I listen to this piece, my ear goes more so to the melody. So I chose the melody to be kind of my driving force and my decision for the tempo. So if I put the metronome at 120 and I'm interpreting this piece as a 3/4, then that's my quarter note, and my bass is going to be on the beat. Which is a kind of more moderate tempo. But if I interpret the melody to be my driving force, and that's kind of like my beat, then it's my dotted quarter note that equals 120. In that case, I'm playing 3 notes per beat. So that's a very different tempo. I chose the latter because, first of all, the melody becomes the center, and I can shape the melody a little bit better rather than putting the beats and the accents on the beat and on the bass and have it sound very boxy. I don't really want to kind of sound 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. I wanted this to be. The melody to connect to each other. So that was why I decided to play it allegro based on the melody line rather than allegro based on the bass line. That, however, also makes it very difficult because now your shifts, not only are they awkward chords, you have to be quick with them and not swallow that last note, make sure you finish. So when you're playing it, you consider how fast you're going to play it and how you're going to work out the technical part. Now the next thing is actually probably the most important thing. So when I was putting the practice videos of this, of me practicing on my Instagram and Facebook page, I actually got a message from a former student of Rodrigo Riera called Rafael Suarez. And he pointed out that the publication that most likely you have or will find actually has some typos in it, and he was really kind to share the corrections that he knew what the correct notes are, and he shared with me the corrections, which I'd like to pass on to you so that you're playing it correctly as well. So the music that I have, and most likely you have because I haven't seen many different editions of this, doesn't have any measure numbers, so I kind of just wrote in the measure numbers to be clear. So you go ahead and number your measures so we know what we're talking about here. So in measure 7, I'll go through like the easy ones, the note corrections. In measure 7, the way the original was, it had you changing the melody note in the middle of the measure. So it kind of was anticipating the resolution earlier. But really what it should be, the D should be twice. And then it resolves to the C in the next measure. So that measure 7 happens exactly the same way in also later on in measure, I believe, 100. It's exactly the same thing that happens there, and a very similar thing, which is the same melodic material, it's just 1 octave higher, is in measure 40. Again, in the music it's written D and then C, but you shouldn't change to a C in the measure, you should change when the next measure comes. So both of them are Ds, and then it resolves. So that's a very similar thing that happens. It's both Ds shouldn't become Cs in all those 3 measures. The next note correction is in measure 92, which should be exactly the same as the penultimate measure, so the measure before the last chord. In 92, the way it's written in the music, you have this B flat stay for the entire measure before going to the G. But really what it should be is your B flat rather, resolving to an A here, and then going to a G. And that's how it's written for the very end. So those 2 measures should match. A more major or bigger kind of mistake is something that I kind of felt was wrong anyway, because as I was playing it, it just felt like a big chunk was missing. And this is measures 115, 16, 17, and what would have been 18, which is just missing. So the way I numbered the measures here, I just numbered exactly as is. But when you get to 115, you're in this section. And let me just back back up for a second. Let me back up to 22, because that same phrase happens in measure 22, 23, 24, 25. So here, this is 24, 25 goes back to the F sharp and the A before going to a new phrase. So we're playing here 22, 23, 24, and then 25, and then this is the new phrase. In 115, you have exactly the same progression, but the way it's written in the music, this is 115, 116, 117, and then it kind of just leaves off from here and jumps to the new phrase, which is incorrect. There should be that resolution. So when you're playing this, going back to this, just like measure 25. So take the material that was in measure 25 and play it as if it was measure 18. And then after this, of course, you just go to a new phrase from there. So that's just the measure that's missing. And another chunk that's kind of missing in the addition is in measures 134, 35, 135, 136, 137. That is the equivalent of what's happening in, let me just back up a little bit. I believe it's in the 65, 66. So going from 66 and playing the next eight measures. So I have this is 66, 67, 68, 69, and then 70, it kind of repeats what I just did. 70, 71, 72, and 74, or 73, yeah. Need to learn how to count. So that fact that you have 4 measures that repeat needs to happen again in 134, 35, 36, 37. Those measures need to repeat. The easiest way for you to fix this situation is just put a repeat sign in the beginning of 134 and then put another, the reverse return sign at 137, and you're good to go. So when you're playing 134 and 135, 136, 137, you go back to 134 and you play it again. And then from there on you continue to 138. So that actually, initially when I played it, I didn't miss the repeat. I kind of wanted to do the repeat because it has happened before, so I noticed that something was different. I just thought maybe because it's going towards the end of the piece, the composer was taking out repeats to kind of just go closer and closer to the end and making it shorter. But that's not how it's supposed to be. The initial instinct that it should be like what happened before is true. So 134 through 137 should be exactly like 65 through whatever that was, 73. So that's the same. And then the missing measure at 118, you're going to take away from the first page and put in the measure 25. And that should be all of the corrections. Now to touch a little bit on the actual like physical execution of this piece, I talked a little bit about the left hand and how it needs to have the stamina and the strength sort of to not only get the awkwardly shaped chords, but to quickly switch from one to another and do it continuously because the piece will not give you a break. That's going to definitely tire out your left hand, so I would just suggest taking your time with it and slowly building the strength and the stamina necessary to play the whole thing at whatever tempo that you choose to do. The faster you choose to play it, the more difficult it will be. At a slow pace, it's almost like you get like a little bit of a break holding the chord before you have to quickly switch, so that makes it a little bit easier. But either way, your left hand's gonna get some fatigue in there. For the right hand, it's equally difficult to keep the stamina going with the pattern that it's there. So the pattern is with the bass, with every other note in the right hand. So sometimes it's with the A, and then it's with the I, and then it's with the M. So your thumb is paired with every single one of your other fingers. And the way I would suggest you play this is make sure that your 3 fingers, when you're playing them, you really are thinking that they're doing arpeggios and you really are free in the movement. Don't get stuck kind of playing like with the bass and making your hands shake, because when you do that over time, especially if you choose to play it faster, your hand's gonna get pretty tense if you kind of concentrate on the bass being repeated instead of concentrating on the fluidity of these fingers. So kind of think of you're just doing an arpeggio here. it. They're preparing. Each time you play one finger, the next one is getting ready to play the next note. And then you just put the bass to it. That way you end up having a little bit more movement in your fingers, but it doesn't tire out your hand as much as it would if you actually started to shake, especially if you end up going fast. So think about the two different things that your hand is doing. Really, the top is just an arpeggio, so if you treat it like an arpeggio and just add the bass to it, it'll serve you better. And then the part is just to bring out the melody. So because of the bass being like that on a 3/4 time, the second note of the melody is going to feel offbeat. So even though I am thinking in 6/8 and in my mind I'm putting the beat on the melody and on a dotted quarter notes, it's still gonna feel offbeat because of the bass. The last thing you want to think about is kind of giving it a little bit more shape, especially with this 3/2. It's very easy to make this sound very boxy, especially if you concentrate more so on the bass. So if you're thinking 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and, it's gonna sound very static. And the bass, it's kind of the driving force, but it makes you kind of stay in one place and move. I prefer to give it a bit more direction, and that's why I like to play it a little bit faster, and the melody being the driving force, so I can shape it more. So here, I'm concentrating on the D's, the top line. And then here, building. So that way you can have some dynamics, you can shape each measure instead of staying very static. And then in the next phrase here, and so on. And then you have basically the same thing happening, just an octave above. So that's kind of it, the most important things that we covered, all the typos in the music. And I hope it was helpful, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.